So it's nice to see some of you staying for this next presentation. I know I'm between you and lunch, which is never a fun place to be. But let me get started. So I'm currently with the IEEE SA, I was mentioned in the introduction. Previously, I have a background in running the UN's work on disarmament and arms control, also working for humanitarian organizations and in various government functions as a diplomat and in other organizations, always dealing with issues of technology governance and AI. So I've seen this from many different perspectives. So my remarks would also reflect on this broader body of work. And I will leave some time at the end for any questions should you want to dive into any of the areas that I will be talking about. So I think as we heard throughout this day and a half now, that AI presents both a remarkable opportunity and also a number of ethical conundrums. And it's important to look at this word ethics, because it's often mentioned in these various tracks. What is it? And of course, you can have days and days discussing, the various definitions of ethics. But to me, in terms of looking at practical ethics, is very much about what are the tools we have at our disposal to deal with the trade-offs and the tension points that we are confronting in every decision that we make, including around these issues of the deployment, development, and use of AI. And as AI revolutions field from healthcare to finance, we need to ponder who reaps the benefits and who gets sidelined, who determines the rules of engagement. And when we discuss edge cases and sacrifices in the name of innovation, and we just heard references made to this in the previous speech, who compromises and who capitalizes? I often state that cultivating humility and the art of questioning are our most important skills at this pivotal juncture as we navigate the various ethical conundrums that I was just referring to, the ethical conundrums. It's important to remember that these are techno-social systems or social technical systems, depending on your perspective, rooted in human development and human choices. I always push back on tech-deterministic narratives where we are left to believe that the development is happening so quickly, there's no way we can interfere. All we need to do is just get on board, start deploying, start embedding, and there's no time for asking questions. This is a wrong narrative. These are very much about human decisions. The pressing issues are less about the technology and more societal, centered on the type of world we wish to inhabit. Now, we also heard in previous sessions about standards. Now, I work for an organization that does much more than standards. There's a big research organization. It's done a lot of, academic conferencing, and standards is one piece of it, but important piece of it. And having worked with several organizations that formulate them, I felt that it was important to also speak a little bit about what they are. So not only are they pivotal in the AI governance area, they also transcend mere bureaucratic instruments. They guide the global directions, including for AI. They guarantee interoperability, emphasize ethics. They also help craft something called middleware, which I've been writing about lately it's a computational term of how to create a middleware that brings together various systems, hardware and software. And in some ways, this is exactly what we need in talking about AI global governance and where standards play such an important role. But of course, these standards need to be continually adapting and complement any other directives and legislative instruments. It's important to differentiate between regulations and standards. They complement each other, but they're not the same. And IEEE has been at the forefront in integrating ethical considerations into AI systems. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to point all of you to what we call the IEEE P7000 series, which are available, which is very unique for a standards organization, without charge, which addresses everything from fairness, accountability, and transparency in every possible autonomous systems or ways of thinking around the development of AI, ethically aligned AI systems, etc. And so they're all available on our website, and I really encourage you to go and check them out there. So AI holds immense potential, but is not without challenges, as I mentioned. Beneath this economic prospect lies deeper societal implications, power disparities, and ethical quandaries. Who sets the guidelines, and how do we guarantee equity? And who gets to define the guardrails and the safeguards that needs to be put in place? And in our pursuit of AI global governance unveils two pitfalls. There are grand endeavors that underperform and superficial efforts. Recognizing the global merits of robust AI governance is paramount also for international stability and the way these systems are being increasingly adopted and embedded into any national response. And sometimes people ask me, because of my background, how do you define national security? And I often say, if you really dumb it down, it's down to competitiveness and economic competitiveness and safeguarding borders. And if you think about AI and the use areas of AI, you would understand why AI is so important in any conversations about national security imperatives. The swift ascension of generative AI underscores robust governance necessity. If utilized judicially, AI can usher in progress. Conversely, hasty deployments risk societal disruption and global tensions. The past inclination was towards AI self-regulation, but this method now falls short. A palpable power discrepancy beckons for increased supervision. Regions across the globe showcase diverse AI governance models, mirroring distinct cultural inclinations and goals. Regulatory diversity can spur innovation, but excess fragmentation risks unethical practices via forum shopping. Addressing this demands international collaboration. AI also necessitates a bespoke international governance structure, taking cues maybe from entities like, and you've seen this in newspapers, I'm sure, the IPCC looking at climate governance, the International Atomic Energy Agency looking at how to safeguard nuclear research, and CERN in terms of how to promote nuclear research to the benefit of all. And there are no direct, I would say always caution against trying to emulate models directly. So what can be learned from all of these models are quite, not only different from each other, but it needs to be mindful of what are we actually trying to bring into the AI field in terms of these governance models that have been able to mitigate and put in place necessary safeguards for those respective areas. And it's important that what we're doing needs to start now. And I will say that AI global governance can't wait for a treaty or wait for some big global framework, but it needs to start now in every decision that we make, and henceforth also why the importance of standards. So shifting to the latter part of the title of this talk, which is age-appropriate design. And I think it's clear to most of those participating here that our youth grapple with very unique digital challenges. Digitalization offers prospects, but also hazards like harmful content exposure and data commodification. Online platforms have transformed education, but amass vast child data. And we've seen this especially as all the schools went online, completely online during the pandemic measures, and how that has increased access to education, but also put children into a different category of risks in terms of the data collected about them in this process. Children are often more tech-savvy than adults. Interestingly, lacking in legal clout, they make up for in digital engagement. And often I hear them being much more aware of the risks and the potential that lies in this new intersection in their digital presence and how that impacts on their physical being. The IEEE SA emphasized the significance of regulated digital realm for youth, mitigating potential long-term impact. Children confront digital hazards like bullying, emphasizing AI system education and sole surveillance. It's important to also emphasize that there is national security imperatives in putting forward much stronger surveillance regimes to do this protection of kids in the digital space, and one needs to be very mindful that that doesn't become a bit of a protection panacea, and really question what actually amounts to keeping our kids safer in the digital realm and what is a pretext for trying to push through other changes in society that are not keeping us more secure, but opens up for a new form of surveillance technology. So in that process, and again, I do a little bit of marketing here, but because I believe it's very important, we developed a couple of years ago something called the IEEE standard. It's called 2089 for those interested in looking into it, which is grounded in it's called the 5 Rights Foundation Principles for Children. It's a UK-based children's foundation looking at rights for kids in a digital space, which offers a blueprint for secure online services and platforms for young people. And of course, the standard resonates with the UN Convention for the Rights of Child, aiming for a safer digital environment through ethical design and child-centric methodologies. And I really recommend everyone to look into this. And of course, feel free to connect with me directly, but also reach out to we have a stand downstairs, an IEEE stand, where we speak about our certification program to help with ethically aligned design more generally. But we also are happy to speak more specifically about the specific age-appropriate design standards. And I hope many of you representing companies and industry might even be considering to look into how to embed those standards into your products and into your daily work, be that or just express your interest in learning more about them. So in conclusion, and then I will open up for maybe a few questions that you might have on this or whatever else you would like to bring up in this space. We believe that AI should be both inclusive and of course that the standards needs to be evolutionary. We're also very mindful of the environmental impact, which often doesn't get talked about so much, the environmental impact on building these large systems, and not least in terms of the geopolitical considerations around water. Water has always been a finite and contested resource, and I think even more so as these models are growing, the number of them are growing, and countries feel more inclined to try to build their own systems or rely upon even bigger systems that are run globally. So I will leave it at that and then open up for any comments and questions from the audience. I always find that more interesting. Yeah. Thank you. Virginia, what happened to know?
Virginia Dignam, Umeå University. Thank you very much, very interesting. I was just thinking about this UNICEF guidance on AI for children, for which I contributed a couple of years ago. And there we talk about 3 Ps, the protection, the providing, so ensuring that technology is also available for children. But one which we talked also about is the participation, ensuring that kids participate also at the level of design. And can you say something more about it? How now IEEE looks at participation, children participating in the design, development and use of the technology that affects them?
Absolutely. So, I mean, you're right. So there's 3 components to it, and participation is probably, in terms of the design, almost the most important one. And so IEEE works with a lot of youth groups around the world, and both independently, but also, like I said, through a collaboration with the Five Rights Foundation in trying to bring them into forums where they get to weigh in more on decisions. I think the recognition is always that this can't just happen on the part of IEEE with this foundational work. It happens, of course, through UNICEF, through many of the international organizations working with children. There is also a greater movement in children's organizations run by children, because I think the tendency which we are trying not to fall into, the pitfall is like bringing a couple of children into the process and saying that they're now represented. But how do we build processes where children actually engage on their own merits in their own environment? And I see this with my own kids, in the way that digital technologies have been made part and parcel of everything they do in their educational system. And they're not put in a position where they can question the choices that the schools make for them. And often what the educational facilities do is that they don't make choices based on what provides the best digital security and safety of their data, that does what teachers have the skills to do, or that the structure needs in terms of efficiency. So how do we create those pockets of engagements throughout? So I'm glad you raised that point as I was going through my points, and I didn't emphasize on that enough. But I think that's like the thing that we have to constantly come back to. Are we creating real venues for engagement, or are we just window dressing that level of engagement? It's not just with kids, by the way. I think it's a general problem. Yes, gentleman in the middle.
Hi, thank you. Lawrence Brooks, University of Sheffield. So I have kids, and when we had the first children, everything was quite age appropriate, and that was quite easy to do, food, TV programs, etc. But then we had another child, and she was then exposed to what the older children were doing. And she was like, I remember in weaning, she was like, I don't want this baby rice. I want the hard, solid food that the older kids are doing. How do you account for the social context, the peer pressure, the social environment? Children today are not just being exposed to this by older adults, they're being exposed to it by their social group. How are we going to work with that?
It's a really good question, and not one that gets addressed in the standards, needless to say. I think that's more of a social question. So having spent a lot of time myself working on these issues from a national security point of view, from a more broader societal point of view, but also one from more cyber digital hygiene perspectives, I bring all of that in when I engage with my own kids and their schools in this process. What's interesting how kids respond is that they're very open to discussing business models. So what I do with mine and with their mates at school is that I often, rather than going all gung-ho on the terrors of digital, I explain them about how they are the product. Because that's increasingly what we all are, right? And one thing you hear a lot from grown-ups, and then it kind of trickles down to kids, is of course, we talk about privacy. And I think most of us, most people here, know stuff about digitals. I think that it's a recognized that train has passed some time ago to speak about full privacy. Now it's more about protecting, certain rights that we have. But what is still not lost, I think, is our ability and our right to push back against being manipulated. This goes into the cognitive sphere. How can we inoculate ourselves cognitively? Of course, there are degrees to that as well, but how do we inoculate our kids towards being manipulated? And I think that's the crux, right? One thing is your engagement with it, but how do you train them? How do you engage with kids in such a way that that level of manipulation doesn't happen? And often people saying, I got nothing to hide. I'm cool with whatever, whoever wants to put on my phone. I got nothing to hide. And you tell them it's not what you have to hide anymore. It is protecting your ability to think freely, independently, not being influenced by everything that gets fed to you. And I find that having that conversation with kids is actually quite constructive, and they're much more amenable to listen to that and make changes in their behavior than many adults are. But I do think that kids mimic adults' behavior in this space, and I see a lot of adults that are not behaving responsibly around AI, especially not generative AI. That's a very short answer to. In the back? Yeah, I see it here. Yeah. Yes.
Thanks very much for a fantastic presentation. I'm just really interested in expanding on that point that you're just talking about. To what extent is addiction and gambling being looked at? We've just had a report in Australia that a lot of children are addicted by the age of 10 and are showing addictive behaviours as a result of the design of these devices. To what extent is that included in the standards or being thought about going forward and the longer term impacts of these kinds of designs? Thank you.
Thank you. I think Virginia knows this because she was part of developing the standards, but it was definitely a big part of the discussion. And this is what any AI-based technology or any digital platform, right? We all know now that addiction, scientific theory around addiction was actually being used to develop, to design certain products. And you see this especially with the platforms that our kids engage with. I'm not going to mention names in this fora, but we all know what the names are, where it's basically clicking you on, keep feeding you, catering to the amygdala in ways that, never been really happened before. Now, how this can be used in more, beyond kids, how this can be used in warfare, how this can be used in national security situations, of course, something also to reflect on because it appeals to that human fallibility of constantly being clicked on. But the addiction side of it is definitely something that has been continuously being discussed. And this is why the age-appropriate design, anything that is seen to influence negatively on the child's safety, but also the child's ability to think freely, should be taken in considerations and should not be put into a product and released into the open market. And that's the unfortunate thing. The things are being released into the open market as an adult product and not being held accountable for it basically catering to kids. And that should not happen. And that's what the standards are really much about as well. Thank you so much to everyone. Thank you for the questions.
Thank you.